The morning sun cast long shadows across Somerset Street as Officer James Barrett began his patrol of Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood. It was 7:45 a.m. on a crisp October morning, and the wealthy residents of the area were beginning their daily routines, walking designer dogs and carrying expensive coffee cups. Barrett sat in his police cruiser, car number 247, watching the morning traffic with sharp blue eyes that rarely missed anything. At 42 years old, his sandy brown hair was already graying at the temples, and 15 years on the force had left deep lines around his mouth. He took pride in what he called keeping the neighborhood safe, though his definition of safety had always been selective. Other officers at the precinct knew about Barrett's tendencies. They saw how he consistently pulled over drivers of color, always finding some minor excuse, a license plate light being too dim, a rolling stop at a sign, or the ever-convenient suspicious behavior. His supervisor had warned him twice about complaint patterns, but Barrett would just shrug it off, saying people were too sensitive these days. On this particular morning, Barrett was especially alert. The neighborhood association had complained about suspicious vehicles in the area, though their description was vague at best. He sipped his black coffee, making a mental note of every car that didn't fit his idea of what belonged in Beacon Hill. Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment in Dorchester, Special Agent Marcus Thompson of the FBI was preparing for what would become one of the most significant days of his career. At 35, Thompson had already distinguished himself within the Bureau, earning a reputation for his methodical approach to complex white-collar crime investigations. Thompson stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his burgundy tie. His dark suit was perfectly pressed, and his shoes shone with military precision, habits he'd kept from his days in the Navy before joining the FBI. The case files spread across his kitchen table represented 6 months of work investigating a sophisticated investment fraud scheme operating through several prestigious financial firms in Boston's financial district. Just 2 more meetings, Thompson muttered to himself, reviewing his notes one last time. The investigation was nearing its end, and today's interviews with potential witnesses were crucial. He'd chosen to drive an unmarked vehicle, a 3-year-old gray Toyota Camry, to maintain his low profile. It was the kind of car that blended in everywhere, perfect for surveillance work. As Thompson drove through the city, his mind was focused on the case. The fraud ring had stolen over $50 million from retirement accounts, primarily targeting elderly investors. He had tracked the money through a maze of offshore accounts, and today's meetings would hopefully provide the final pieces of evidence needed for arrests. What Thompson didn't know was that his route to the financial district would take him through Barrett's patrol area. He had chosen to cut through Beacon Hill to avoid the morning traffic on the main roads, a decision that seemed logical at the time. The weather had turned the leaves golden and red, and the historic brick buildings of Beacon Hill stood proudly against the autumn sky. Thompson drove carefully, maintaining the speed limit, his case files neatly organized on the passenger seat. His FBI credentials were tucked in his breast pocket, but his badge was stored in his briefcase, standard procedure for undercover work. As he turned onto Somerset Street, Officer Barrett's eyes locked onto Thompson's Camry. Barrett straightened in his seat, watching the vehicle through his patrol car's windshield. To most officers, there would have been nothing remarkable about the car or its driver. But Barrett wasn't most officers. "Well, what do we have here?" Barrett mumbled to himself, putting his coffee cup down. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel as he watched Thompson's car pass. "Little out of place for this neighborhood, aren't we?" The irony of the moment was lost on Barrett, that the man he was about to target was not only a federal agent but one who had spent years serving his country and protecting its citizens. In Barrett's mind, he was already constructing a narrative, one that would justify his next actions. Thompson, focused on mentally preparing for his upcoming meetings, checked his rearview mirror and noticed the police cruiser. He thought nothing of it. He had no reason to. After all, this was just another morning in America, and he was just another professional heading to work. Neither man knew that in the next few minutes, their lives would intersect in a way that would spark a national conversation and force a community to confront uncomfortable truths about power, prejudice, and justice. Officer Barrett waited exactly 3 blocks before activating his cruiser's lights. He had followed Thompson's gray Toyota Camry, searching for any small violation he could use as an excuse. When Thompson signaled for a full 3 seconds before making a turn instead of the required 5, Barrett saw his opportunity. The morning traffic moved slowly around them as Thompson noticed the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He checked his speedometer out of habit, knowing he hadn't been speeding. With 15 years of law enforcement experience, he recognized the tactic, following a car long enough to find or create a reason for a stop. Thompson guided his car to the curb, positioning it perfectly. His hands moved automatically to the steering wheel, placing them at the 10 and 2 o'clock positions. Years of training, both as an FBI agent and simply as a black man in America, had taught him the importance of these moments. "Just stay calm," Thompson whispered to himself, watching in his side mirror as Barrett approached. The officer's hand was already resting on his holstered weapon, a detail Thompson couldn't help but notice. His FBI files lay on the passenger seat, and he considered hiding them but decided against any sudden movements. Barrett's footsteps were heavy and deliberate as he approached the driver's side window. The morning sun caught his badge, number 4578, as he positioned himself slightly behind the car door pillar. Standard police procedure, but his stance was unnecessarily aggressive for a routine traffic stop. "License and registration," Barrett demanded, not bothering with the usual greeting. His tone carried an edge that made several passing pedestrians slow their pace and take notice. Thompson kept his movements slow and clear. "Good morning, officer," he said calmly, reaching for his wallet with deliberate movements. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Barrett's face tightened. "You failed to signal properly for your turn back there. Where are you headed in such a hurry? This is a nice neighborhood. You visiting someone?" The implication in Barrett's tone was clear. Thompson had heard it before, but today it carried extra weight. He was working undercover, and revealing his FBI status could compromise months of investigation into the financial fraud case. "I'm on my way to a business meeting, officer," Thompson replied evenly, handing over his license and registration. He noticed a young woman across the street had stopped and taken out her phone, likely recording the interaction. Barrett studied the license with exaggerated scrutiny. "This vehicle registered to you, Mr. Thompson?" he asked, emphasizing the "Mr." in a way that made it sound like an insult. "Yes, sir, it is. Everything is current and in order." Barrett's eyes swept over the interior of the car, landing on the files in the passenger seat. "What's all that paperwork? Looks awful official for someone just heading to a business meeting." More people had gathered on the sidewalk now. An older man in a business suit had stopped to watch, phone in hand. Two college students with backpacks stood nearby, whispering to each other. The scene was drawing attention, exactly what Thompson had hoped to avoid. "Those are confidential work documents, officer," Thompson explained patiently. "Is there anything else you need to verify? I'm running late for my meeting." Barrett's face darkened at what he perceived as defiance. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." His hand moved more firmly to his weapon. "Now." Thompson's mind raced through his options. Revealing his FBI status would protect him personally, but could destroy months of careful investigation. Lives were at stake. The retirement savings of hundreds of elderly victims hung in the balance. "Officer, I don't understand why that's necessary," Thompson said, maintaining his calm demeanor. "I provided all required documentation." "I said step out of the vehicle." Barrett's voice rose sharply. "Do not make me repeat myself again." By now, at least 6 people had stopped to record the interaction. The morning traffic had slowed to a crawl as drivers rubbernecked to watch the scene unfold. A delivery truck driver had parked his vehicle and stepped out, sensing something wrong in the officer's aggressive stance. Thompson could feel the situation spiraling. His training told him that Barrett was escalating unnecessarily, creating a dangerous situation out of a routine traffic stop. But his mission, his case, and potentially the lives of future victims depended on maintaining his cover. With careful movements, Thompson reached for his door handle, knowing that the next few moments would change not only his life, but the lives of many others in ways none of them could yet imagine. The crisp morning air hit Thompson's face as he stepped out of his car, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. His polished dress shoes touched the pavement as a cool breeze rustled through the trees lining Somerset Street. The growing crowd of onlookers had swelled to nearly 15 people, their phones raised like silent witnesses. "Hands where I can see them," Barrett barked, his voice echoing off the brick buildings. "Turn around and face your vehicle." Thompson complied, placing his palms flat against the cool metal of his car roof. His reflection in the window showed his burgundy tie hanging forward, the same tie he had carefully selected just an hour ago. Behind him, Barrett's aggressive stance cast a long shadow in the morning sun. Sarah Chen, a local barista on her way to work, had stopped dead in her tracks. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her phone, recording everything. Next to her, an elderly man named George Peterson shook his head in disgust, having seen too many similar scenes in his 70 years. "Officer, I want to understand what's happening here," Thompson said calmly, maintaining his professional demeanor. "I provided all necessary documentation, and my papers are in order." Barrett moved closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. "I'm getting real tired of your attitude. You think just because you're wearing a fancy suit, you belong here?" He performed an aggressive pat-down, checking Thompson's pockets with unnecessary force. "Sir, I have the right to know why I'm being detained," Thompson insisted, his FBI training kicking in. He knew every law being broken in this interaction, every violation of protocol, but revealing his true identity now would compromise everything. A young law student named Michael Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, stepping forward. "Hey, officer, this is clearly racial profiling. We're all watching this." Barrett's head snapped toward the crowd. "Stay back. This is police business. Anyone interfering will be arrested for obstruction." The tension in the air grew thicker. Cars had stopped completely now, creating a traffic jam. Someone in the crowd was live streaming the entire incident, their commentary a mix of anger and disbelief. Thompson felt Barrett's grip tighten on his shoulder. The officer's wedding ring dug into his suit jacket, a detail he automatically filed away from years of investigative work. In the distance, he heard the distinctive sound of another police siren approaching. "Listen here," Barrett hissed, his voice low enough that only Thompson could hear. "I've been protecting this neighborhood for 15 years. I know trouble when I see it. That fancy suit doesn't fool me." A woman's voice rang out from the crowd. "I'm calling the police commissioner. This is absolutely unacceptable." It was Patricia Morrison, a local city council member who happened to be walking by. She had her phone to her ear, her face a mask of determination. Thompson's mind raced. His case files were still visible in the car, files containing sensitive information about the fraud investigation. If Barrett searched his vehicle, months of undercover work could be compromised. The lives and savings of countless elderly victims hung in the balance. "Officer Barrett." Thompson read the name tag clearly visible on the officer's uniform. "I understand you're doing your job, but this situation is escalating unnecessarily. I've broken no laws." The backup Barrett had called for arrived, tires screeching as another police cruiser pulled up. Officer Sandra Martinez stepped out, immediately assessing the situation. Her eyes moved from Barrett's aggressive stance to Thompson's professional appearance, to the growing crowd of angry onlookers. "What's the situation here, Barrett?" Martinez asked, her hand resting cautiously on her belt. "This suspect was driving suspiciously through the neighborhood," Barrett replied, his voice tight. "Refused to properly identify his business here. Could be casing houses." Thompson remained still, knowing that any movement could be used against him. The morning sun had risen higher, and sweat began to form under his collar despite the cool air. His FBI credentials felt heavy in his breast pocket, a weight that could end this situation instantly and destroy his investigation just as quickly. Officer Martinez's eyes narrowed as she observed Barrett's behavior. She had worked with him before and knew his reputation. The crowd's phones continued recording, documenting every word, every movement, every second of this increasingly volatile situation. The next few moments would determine not just the outcome of this confrontation, but the future of many lives involved, though none of them knew just how far-reaching the consequences would be. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into Thompson's wrists as Officer Barrett roughly secured them behind his back. The clicking sound seemed to echo across Somerset Street, causing several onlookers to gasp. The morning had turned into a scene none of the witnesses would soon forget. "You're under arrest for suspicious behavior and resisting an officer," Barrett announced loudly, though Thompson hadn't resisted at all. Officer Martinez stood nearby, her face showing clear discomfort with the situation. She kept glancing between her fellow officer and the growing crowd. "I need to secure my vehicle," Thompson said calmly, thinking about the sensitive FBI files on the passenger seat. "There are important work documents inside." Barrett laughed coldly. Oh, I'm sure there are. We'll be taking a very close look at those work documents of yours. He turned to Martinez. Call for a tow truck. We're impounding this vehicle. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people now. Jennifer Wu, a local news reporter who lived nearby, had arrived with her camera crew. The morning news helicopter could be heard circling overhead, drawn by the commotion. This is a complete violation of civil rights, shouted an elderly black man from the crowd. He was recording everything on his iPad, his hands shaking with anger. We all see what's happening here. Thompson felt a drop of sweat roll down his back despite the cool morning air. His carefully pressed suit was now wrinkled from the rough handling, and his burgundy tie hung askew. But it wasn't his appearance that concerned him. It was the potential compromise of 6 months of undercover work. Officer Martinez approached Barrett, speaking in a low voice. James, maybe we should double-check his credentials. He seems legitimate. Stay out of this, Sandra, Barrett snapped. I know what I'm doing. This is my collar. His face had turned red, and a vein pulsed in his neck. The presence of so many witnesses seemed to make him more determined rather than cautious. Thompson watched as a young patrol officer began searching his car. The FBI files were right there, clearly visible. In moments, his cover would be blown. He had to make a decision: maintain his undercover status to protect the investigation or reveal his identity to avoid further escalation. Officer Barrett, Thompson said steadily, you're making a serious mistake. One that could have significant consequences. Barrett responded by roughly pushing Thompson toward the patrol car. Save it for the station. You're not talking your way out of this one. Patricia Morrison, the city council member, was now on her second phone call. Yes, Commissioner, I'm watching it happen right now. Officer Barrett is completely out of control. Yes, I'm recording everything. The young officer searching Thompson's car called out, Sir, you need to see these documents. They look like. Bag everything as evidence. Barrett interrupted. We'll sort it out at the station. He opened the back door of his patrol car and pressed Thompson's head down, forcing him inside. The crowd's angry voices grew louder. Someone started chanting no justice, no peace. Others joined in. Officer Martinez had stepped back, speaking urgently into her radio, likely calling for crowd control. Inside the patrol car, Thompson sat upright, his trained mind already documenting every detail of the incident. Through the window, he could see his Toyota being hooked up to a tow truck, his case files visible through the windshield. Years of FBI training had prepared him for maintaining cover under pressure, but this situation was pushing those limits. Barrett got into the driver's seat, slamming the door. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Think you can come into my neighborhood, acting like you own the place? He muttered, more to himself than to Thompson. As the patrol car pulled away from the curb, Thompson caught a final glimpse of the scene in the side mirror. The crowd had spilled into the street, phones still recording. Officer Martinez was speaking with Jennifer Wu, the reporter. The news helicopter hovered overhead, capturing everything. Thompson closed his eyes briefly, knowing that the next few hours would change everything, not just for him and Barrett, but for the entire Boston Police Department. The only question was whether his months of undercover work would survive what was about to unfold at the police station. The patrol car turned a corner, and the angry crowd disappeared from view. The echoes of what had just occurred would soon be reverberating far beyond the brick-lined streets of Beacon Hill. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the booking area of Boston Police Station's District A1 as Officer Barrett pushed Thompson toward the fingerprint scanner. The digital machine sat on a scratched metal desk, its screen casting a blue glow in the stark room. Put your fingers on the scanner, Barrett commanded, roughly positioning Thompson's right hand. Let's see who you really are. The booking sergeant, Mike O'Malley, a veteran with 30 years on the force, watched the scene with growing unease. Something about this arrest felt wrong from the moment Barrett walked in with his well-dressed prisoner. Thompson remained silent as his fingerprints were scanned. He knew what was coming. The machine beeped, processing the prints through various databases. Barrett stood nearby, arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. Suddenly, the machine's alert tone filled the room. O'Malley leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses as he stared at the screen. His face went pale. Holy shit, O'Malley whispered. He looked up at Thompson, then back at the screen. Barrett, You need to remove those cuffs, right now. Barrett scoffed. What are you talking about? This man is Special Agent Marcus Thompson, Federal Bureau of Investigation. O'Malley's voice carried across the now silent booking area. Other officers stopped what they were doing, turning to stare. The color drained from Barrett's face. His hands froze on the keys to the handcuffs. That's impossible. He's lying. This has to be a mistake. Thompson finally spoke, his voice steady and professional. My credentials are in my breast pocket, Officer Barrett. The ones you ignored during your roadside search. O'Malley hurried around the desk, quickly removing Thompson's handcuffs himself. Agent Thompson, sir, I cannot apologize enough for this situation. The booking area had become eerily quiet. Even the usual background noise of ringing phones and radio chatter seemed muted. Officers who had been processing other arrests stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. I want to speak to your chief of police, Thompson said, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had been too tight. And I need immediate access to my vehicle and the files that were seized. Barrett stood rooted to the spot, his face a mix of shock and growing horror. You can't be FBI. You were driving suspiciously through. Through what, Officer Barrett? Thompson turned to face him directly. A wealthy neighborhood? While being black, is that the suspicious activity you observed? The station doors burst open as Police Chief Gloria Martinez strode in, her face tight with concern. The news had already reached her office. Behind her came two more FBI agents in dark suits, Thompson's backup team, who had been monitoring the situation from a distance. Agent Thompson, Chief Martinez said, extending her hand. I just got off the phone with your bureau chief. I want to personally apologize for this inexcusable incident. Thompson straightened his wrinkled tie. Chief Martinez, we have bigger concerns at the moment. My vehicle contains sensitive files related to an ongoing federal investigation. Every minute we waste here puts that investigation at risk. Barrett's legs seemed to give out as he sank into a nearby chair. His career flashed before his eyes as the full impact of his actions began to sink in. Officer Sandra Martinez, who had followed them to the station, stepped forward. Chief, I have the vehicle evidence log here. Nothing has been processed yet. The car is still in the impound lot. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Thompson's FBI colleagues secured his vehicle and files. Internal affairs officers arrived, immediately pulling Barrett into a separate room. The booking area buzzed with whispered conversations and shocked expressions. As Thompson gathered his belongings, he could hear the mounting chaos outside the station. News vans had already arrived, their satellite dishes reaching into the sky. The morning's incident had gone viral, with social media exploding with video clips from multiple angles. Chief Martinez approached Thompson again, her face grave. Agent Thompson, how do you want to proceed with this? Thompson looked through the station window at the growing media circus outside. His original investigation was safe. His backup team had contained the situation. Now he had a different kind of case to pursue. Chief Martinez, he said, straightening his suit jacket, I believe we have some serious departmental issues to address, and this time I won't be undercover. The implications of his words hung in the air as police officers, FBI agents, and department officials moved around them, all knowing that this was just the beginning of a much larger storm. 3 days after the incident, the FBI's Civil Rights Division took over conference room A at the Boston Federal Building. The walls were covered with photos, timelines, and data charts. Special Agent Marcus Thompson sat at the head of the long table, reviewing Officer Barrett's 15-year service record spread out before him. Agent Thompson, said Sarah Rodriguez, the lead investigator from Internal Affairs, pointing to a computer screen. We've analyzed Barrett's traffic stop data for the past 5 years. The numbers are disturbing. The statistics told a clear story. Of Barrett's last 500 traffic stops, 85% involved minority drivers. Of those stops, less than 10% resulted in actual citations. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Thompson leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie slightly. The past few days had been intense. His original financial fraud case had been safely transferred to another team, allowing him to focus entirely on this new investigation. Show me the body camera footage again, Thompson requested, turning to the large screen on the wall. The video played, showing Barrett's aggressive approach to Thompson's car. The audio was clear. "This is a nice neighborhood. You visiting someone?" The prejudice in Barrett's tone was evident to everyone in the room. "We've received 47 new complaints since this story broke," Rodriguez continued, shuffling through a thick stack of papers. "People who were previously afraid to come forward. Many have video evidence." The door opened, and FBI Director Catherine Chen entered the room. The entire team stood respectfully. She had flown in from Washington specifically for this case, understanding its national implications. "Agent Thompson," Chen addressed him directly, "your incident has sparked something larger than we anticipated. Major news networks are running stories about similar cases across the country. We need to handle this perfectly." Thompson nodded, standing to brief the director using the wall displays. "We've uncovered a pattern of systematic bias in Officer Barrett's conduct, but it goes deeper than one officer. The department's oversight failed at multiple levels. The investigation had revealed that 3 different supervisors had ignored formal complaints about Barrett. 2 other officers in the same precinct showed similar patterns in their arrest records. The problem was institutional." "There's more," said technical analyst James Park, pulling up new data on his laptop. "We found evidence of altered reports. Dates changed, details modified. Someone was helping cover this up." The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about one racist officer anymore, it was about a system that protected him. Thompson walked to the window, looking out over Boston's skyline. The city had erupted in peaceful protests since his arrest, with thousands gathering outside police headquarters demanding reform. His face had become a symbol, appearing on news broadcasts and social media worldwide. "Director," Thompson turned back to the room, "we need to expand this investigation. Barrett is just the tip of the iceberg." Chen nodded gravely. "You'll have whatever resources you need. The Attorney General wants daily updates. The President is watching this case closely." The team worked late into the evening, piecing together years of evidence. They discovered that Barrett had been named in 6 civil rights lawsuits, all quietly settled out of court. His personnel files showed commendations for proactive policing in wealthy neighborhoods, a euphemism that now carried new meaning. Around midnight, Thompson's phone buzzed. It was a text from Patricia Morrison, the city council member who had witnessed his arrest. "Channel 5 just got hold of Barrett's emails. They're bad, really bad." Within an hour, the investigation team had obtained the emails. The contents were shocking: racist jokes shared between officers, discussions about targeting specific neighborhoods, casual references to profiling strategies. "This changes everything," Rodriguez said, reading through the emails. "We can prove intent now. This wasn't just unconscious bias." Thompson stood at the evidence board, adding new connections with a red marker. The case had grown beyond anything he had expected when Barrett first pulled him over. It wasn't just about justice for one incident anymore. It was about changing an entire system. "Tomorrow," Thompson announced to his tired team, "we start interviewing every officer in Barrett's chain of command. We need to understand how deep this goes." As the team finally packed up for the night, Thompson looked at the photo of Barrett pinned to the center of the evidence board. The officer's smug expression in his department photo seemed different now, not confident, but afraid, and he had every reason to be. The investigation was just beginning, and it would shake the Boston Police Department to its core. The police commissioner's press conference room was packed to capacity on a rainy Thursday morning, 6 weeks after Thompson's arrest. Cameras flashed continuously as Commissioner William Hayes approached the podium, his face grave. Behind him stood Chief Martinez, several city council members, and Special Agent Thompson, all wearing serious expressions. "After a thorough investigation by the FBI's Civil Rights Division and our Internal Affairs Department," Hayes began, his voice slightly trembling, "we are announcing the termination of Officer James Barrett, effective immediately." The room erupted with questions from reporters. Camera lights intensified. Jennifer Wu, who had first covered the incident, raised her hand first. "Commissioner, is it true that the investigation revealed a broader pattern of misconduct within the department?" Hayes gripped the podium tightly. "Yes, as a result of this investigation, 3 additional officers have been suspended pending further review. 2 supervisors have been demoted, and 1 precinct captain has chosen to take early retirement." The investigation had uncovered more than just individual acts of bias. It had exposed a culture of silence and complicity that had festered for years. Barrett's case was just the catalyst that brought everything to light. In the back of the room, Sarah Chen, the barista who had recorded the original incident, watched with tears in her eyes. Her video had gone viral, gathering over 20 million views and sparking nationwide protests. The department will undergo mandatory bias training, Hayes continued. We're implementing new oversight measures, including civilian review boards for all use of force incidents and traffic stop reviews. Thompson stood quietly, observing Barrett's former colleagues in the audience. Some looked ashamed, others angry, and a few seemed relieved that change was finally coming. Officer Sandra Martinez, who had been present during his arrest, had become a key witness in the investigation, providing crucial testimony about the department's cultural problems. Outside the building, hundreds of protesters gathered in the rain, holding signs demanding further reforms. The crowd included George Peterson, the elderly man who had witnessed Thompson's arrest. He now led a community advisory board created to bridge the gap between police and minority communities. Back inside, Chief Martinez stepped to the podium. We're announcing a new transparency initiative. All officer body camera footage will be automatically uploaded to a secure server accessible by civilian oversight committees. Traffic stop data will be published monthly, broken down by demographics. The changes weren't limited to policies. Barrett's case had triggered a review of past arrests, leading to the dismissal of dozens of cases where racial bias may have played a role. The city had also agreed to pay substantial settlements to victims of proven profiling. As for Barrett himself, he faced more than just unemployment. The district attorney had filed criminal charges for civil rights violations, using his own body camera footage as evidence. His police union had declined to provide legal representation after the email evidence emerged. Patricia Morrison, now heading the City Council's new police reform committee, addressed the media next. This isn't just about punishing bad officers, it's about changing the system that protected them. We're implementing psychological screening for new recruits and requiring annual reviews of all officers' stop data. Thompson finally stepped forward to speak. The room fell silent. His case had become a symbol of both what was wrong with policing and what could be done to fix it. What happened to me was not unique, Thompson began. What is unique is that I was in a position to do something about it. But reform shouldn't require an FBI agent to be profiled for the system to change. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Every citizen deserves equal treatment under the law. Every traffic stop should be based on conduct, not color. And every officer who violates these principles must be held accountable. The press conference concluded with the announcement of a new scholarship program for minority students interested in law enforcement careers. The city had committed to diversifying its police force, setting ambitious recruitment goals for the next 5 years. As the reporters filed out, Thompson received a text message. His original financial fraud investigation, continued by other agents, had just led to 15 arrests. Justice was being served on multiple fronts. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a rainbow appeared over the city. George Peterson led the crowd in a chant that echoed through the streets. Change is coming. Change is here. For Boston's police department, it was the end of one era and the beginning of another. The badge of prejudice had finally been exposed, and in its place, a new model of policing was emerging. One stop, one reform, one day at a time. 6 months after the incident, Special Agent Marcus Thompson stood at the podium in the Massachusetts State House's Grand Hall. Before him sat an audience of police chiefs from across the country, civil rights leaders, politicians, and community activists. Through the tall windows, spring sunlight illuminated the historic chamber. Change, Thompson began, adjusting his microphone, doesn't come from one incident. It comes from how we respond to that incident. He paused, looking at the faces before him. 6 months ago, I was handcuffed on a street in Beacon Hill. Today, I'm here to talk about what we've learned since then. In the front row, George Peterson nodded encouragingly. The elderly man had become a close friend and was now the chairperson of Boston's new Police Community Oversight Board. Next to him sat Sarah Chen, the barrister whose video had sparked national outrage. She had just completed the police academy and would soon become one of Boston's newest officers. The numbers tell a story, Thompson continued, gesturing to the screen behind him. Since implementing our new policies, traffic stop disparities have decreased by 60%. Civilian complaints are down 40%. But numbers aren't everything. Real change happens in daily interactions. The reforms in Boston had become a national model. Police departments from Los Angeles to Miami had sent representatives to learn from what was now called the Thompson Protocol. The comprehensive reform package included psychological screening for officers, mandatory body cameras with civilian review, and community oversight of police practices. Former officer James Barrett's trial had concluded 2 months earlier. He had been found guilty of civil rights violations and sentenced to 18 months in prison. More importantly, his case had led to the review of thousands of past arrests, resulting in hundreds of overturned convictions. But this isn't about punishment, Thompson emphasized, clicking to his next slide. This is about prevention, about building a police force that truly serves and protects everyone equally. Officer Sandra Martinez, recently promoted to sergeant, sat in the audience taking notes. Her decision to testify about departmental problems had initially made her unpopular with some colleagues, but now she was leading the department's new training program. Patricia Morrison, who had witnessed the original incident, was now running for mayor on a platform of continued police reform. Her campaign signs could be seen all over Boston, reading, "Continue the change." The most significant change, Thompson continued, isn't in our policies or procedures. It's in our mindset. Every officer now undergoes monthly community engagement sessions. They walk the neighborhoods they serve, meet with residents, learn their stories. The new training program included simulation exercises where officers experienced being profiled themselves. It had proven particularly effective in building empathy and understanding. Even veteran officers reported that it changed their perspective. In the back of the room, Jennifer Wu, the reporter who had covered the story from the beginning, was working on a documentary about the transformation. Her cameras captured Thompson's speech as he moved to his conclusion. 6 months ago, I had a choice, Thompson said, his voice softening. I could have revealed my FBI credentials immediately. It would have saved me from a humiliating arrest. But then we wouldn't be here today. Sometimes progress requires discomfort. Sometimes change needs a catalyst. He looked around the room, making eye contact with various attendees. Today, Boston has the highest rate of minority recruitment in its police academy's history. Our civilian review board has become a national model. Community trust is slowly being rebuilt. The changes weren't just institutional. Local businesses had removed their suspicious person signs. Community members regularly attended police training sessions as civilian advisors. Schools had started programs teaching students about their rights and responsibilities during police interactions. But our work isn't finished, Thompson declared, straightening his tie. This is just the beginning. Every city, every department, every officer has a role to play in this transformation. As he concluded his speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Through the State House windows, you could see the streets of Boston where it had all started. The same streets where Officer Barrett had once patrolled were now watched over by a new generation of officers trained in community policing and cultural awareness. And in its place, a new model of policing was emerging. One stop, one reform, one day at a time. 6 months after the incident, Special Agent Marcus Thompson stood at the podium in the Massachusetts State House's Grand Hall. Before him sat an audience of police chiefs from across the country, civil rights leaders, politicians, and community activists. Through the tall windows, spring sunlight illuminated the historic chamber. Change, Thompson began, adjusting his microphone, doesn't come from one incident. It comes from how we respond to that incident. He paused, looking at the faces before him. 6 months ago, I was handcuffed on a street in Beacon Hill. Today, I'm here to talk about what we've learned since then. In the front row, George Peterson nodded encouragingly. The elderly man had become a close friend and was now the chairperson of Boston's new Police Community Oversight Board. Next to him sat Sarah Chen, the barrister whose video had sparked national outrage. She had just completed the police academy and would soon become one of Boston's newest officers. The numbers tell a story, Thompson continued, gesturing to the screen behind him. Since implementing our new policies, traffic stop disparities have decreased by 60%. Civilian complaints are down 40%, but numbers aren't everything. Real change happens in daily interactions. The reforms in Boston had become a national model. Police departments from Los Angeles to Miami had sent representatives to learn from what was now called the Thompson Protocol. The comprehensive reform package included psychological screening for officers, mandatory body cameras with civilian review, and community oversight of police practices. Former Officer James Barrett's trial had concluded 2 months earlier. He had been found guilty of civil rights violations and sentenced to 18 months in prison. More importantly, his case had led to the review of thousands of past arrests, resulting in hundreds of overturned convictions. But this isn't about punishment, Thompson emphasized, clicking to his next slide. This is about prevention, about building a police force that truly serves and protects everyone equally. Officer Sandra Martinez, recently promoted to sergeant, sat in the audience taking notes. Her decision to testify about departmental problems had initially made her unpopular with some colleagues, but now she was leading the department's new training program. Patricia Morrison, who had witnessed the original incident, was now running for mayor on a platform of continued police reform. Her campaign signs could be seen all over Boston, reading "Continue the Change." The most significant change, Thompson continued, isn't in our policies or procedures. It's in our mindset. Every officer now undergoes monthly community engagement sessions. They walk the neighborhoods they serve, meet with residents, learn their stories. The new training program included simulation exercises where officers experienced being profiled themselves. It had proven particularly effective in building empathy and understanding. Even veteran officers reported that it changed their perspective. In the back of the room, Jennifer Wu, the reporter who had covered the story from the beginning, was working on a documentary about the transformation. Her cameras captured Thompson's speech as he moved to his conclusion. 6 months ago, I had a choice, Thompson said, his voice softening. I could have revealed my FBI credentials immediately. It would have saved me from a humiliating arrest. But then we wouldn't be here today. Sometimes progress requires discomfort. Sometimes change needs a catalyst. He looked around the room, making eye contact with various attendees. Today, Boston has the highest rate of minority recruitment in its police academy's history. Our civilian review board has become a national model. Community trust is slowly being rebuilt. The changes weren't just institutional. Local businesses had removed their suspicious person signs. Community members regularly attended police training sessions as civilian advisors. Schools had started programs teaching students about their rights and responsibilities during police interactions. But our work isn't finished, Thompson declared, straightening his tie. This is just the beginning. Every city, every department, every officer has a role to play in this transformation. As he concluded his speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Through the State House windows, he could see the streets of Boston where it had all started. The same streets where Officer Barrett had once patrolled were now watched over by a new generation of officers trained in community policing and cultural awareness. Later that evening, Thompson drove home through Beacon Hill. He passed the spot where he had been arrested 6 months ago. A community garden had been planted there, with a small plaque reading, "Change grows here." As the sun set over Boston, Thompson smiled. The badge of prejudice was being replaced by something new, a badge of honor, trust, and equal justice for all. The change wasn't complete, but it was real, it was growing, and it was irreversible. The story of one traffic stop had become the story of a city's transformation, and somewhere in Boston, a new police recruit was learning the most important lesson of all: the color of justice should be colorblind.